I covered a lead poisoning story in East Chicago, Indiana. Shocker, poor black neighborhood. They literally built a poor government housing complex for African Americans on top of a lead smeltering plant. And the EPA, the state agency, never really monitored it or anything to see oh, how's the lead levels? Oh, is there other things than lead? When I was there for TYT, they found lead levels in the soil over 200 times the allowable limit for lead. Over 200 times the allowable limit for lead in the soil. They found arsenic in the soil. They found lead in the surrounding community soil. They found arsenic in the surrounding community soil. They found lead in water, even though an EPA official, when I interviewed him, told him this isn't a Flint, Michigan issue. There's no issue with the water here. 4 months later, lead in the water. And that got no media attention, barely any. A couple articles, but that's it. I was there, I've been there 6 times. I was actually planning on going back there, but unfortunately, some things happened and, TYT, let me go. So anyway, the government is not even doing a good job to clean up East Chicago. There's people sick in East Chicago. There are mothers. People in East Chicago told me, we always had 4 or 5 women who were all young, on the same block, getting these same kinds of cancers. And we just thought it was coincidence and dumb luck. And then they see, oh, the lead, the arsenic, the groundwater contamination, the DuPont insecticide factory right here that was never regulated, really. The BP that's come in. So not only is nothing being done for East Chicago, but guess what? EPA discovers another lead-contaminated neighborhood, this time near East Chicago. The chickens are coming home to roost. And all the irresponsible, reckless industrialization that this country has done, and also the lack of investment in new infrastructure, is now coming home to roost everywhere. And it's one of the biggest scandals in America that it's not getting any coverage. Almost every time federal officials, this is from Chicago Tribune, almost every time federal officials test a yard in Northwest Indiana, they find staggering levels of brain-damaging lead in the soil. The latest toxic neighborhoods uncovered by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency are near an abandoned smelter that churned lead, arsenic, and other heavy metals into the air during most of the last century. Soil samples collected since October have identified more than 24 contaminated yards in Hammond and Whiting. And EPA officials expect to find more as they expand their investigation. Oh, the EPA investigates things. In a situation eerily similar to the lead contamination crisis still unfolding in nearby East Chicago, authorities failed to test residential areas next to the former Federated Metals property for more than 3 decades. Let me repeat. Authorities failed to test residential areas next to the former Federated Metals property for more than 3 decades, even though the EPA and the Indiana Department of Environmental Management designated it one of the region's most toxic industrial sites in the mid-1980s. Never wonder why it took the federal agency so long to get involved? Based on interviews and a review of documents, the history of the shuttered Federated Metals smelter appears to have been all but forgotten until 2016, when career employees at the EPA Chicago office began digging through files on polluted sites in Northwest Indiana that either haven't been cleaned up or weren't scoured through thoroughly enough years ago. Quote, "It leaves you thinking they don't really care about us," said David Dabertine, a Hammond attorney who led the state environmental agency's Northwest Indiana office during the early 1990s. Nearly 10,000 people live within a mile of this former smelter. Between 2005 and 2015, 53 children younger than age 6 in census tracts surrounding the site had lead levels exceeding federal health guidelines. More than 8% of those tested, according to data provided by the Indiana State Department of Health. The ongoing inquiry is part of the EPA's response to a national criticism of its slow reaction to polluted water in Flint and the lead-contaminated housing in East Chicago. And I don't need to read the rest because it's the same song and dance everywhere you go. And by the way, frankly, this article, although I think overall, credit to them for covering it, gives the EPA a little bit too much benefit of the doubt. Because the EPA, by the way, EPA, and I've seen it all over the country, the EPA is not testing places they know they should be testing on purpose. And the EPA is also not testing for every single thing they should be testing for, because you know what happens when you test all these areas as frequently as you should, which for most of these places was about 20 years ago? You know what happens? You'll probably find a lot of stuff like lead and arsenic and other particulate matter, bacteria, which has been found in Flint. And you know what happens then, folks? Ooh, we need to do more testing. And we might need to dig out those pipes. And we might need to go in and remediate near those factories. And we might need to go in and clean some of the water streams around there. And you know what that is, folks? Money, 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 money. Money. Money, 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 money. Because they'll spend the money on a giant, Trump wants to spend money on a giant parade for veterans, which, you know, I don't want to like attack celebrating veterans, but we don't need a parade for veterans. We need to stop sending them to illegal wars. We need to stop sending them to risk their lives for oil. That's what we need to stop doing. That's how we could help veterans. And, you know, Trump wants to spend money on like bolstering the border so we can stop MS-13, which is, he doesn't care about MS-13. It's just a blatant play to his racist base, a lot of racist in his base. And, you know, the Democrats, if they get in, they're going to want to spend money on mostly bullshit, too. Obama? I didn't hear Obama talking about changing the pipes, remediating water. Hell, Flint and East Chicago happened with him at the helm. President Obama. Most of this testing that should have been done in East Chicago and Flint and other poor communities, because Flint is poor black and white. East Chicago is poor black and Latino. They didn't happen because, as Michael Moore said it, I give him credit, people in Flint are poor and they don't have lobbyists. Same thing in East Chicago, and the same thing at these communities now. In nearby East Chicago, Hammond and Whiting. Hammond and Whiting. And honestly, I'm a little overwhelmed because when we do launch the company, when we do get back in the field, I'm thinking like, how many arms do I have? How many microphones do I have? How many camera people do I have? Because every day there's a new community. Now they're finding all sorts of contamination near military bases all over the country. Because military bases have I always mispronounce it, PFAS, poroflunaric acids, which were dumped in the water in the Cape Fear River, which contaminated that river, where 500,000 people get their water in Wilmington, North Carolina, from that river. It was dumped into the Ohio River Valley, those chemicals, and it causes cancer. And companies have been allowed to basically dump this chemical that's used to make Teflon and other cooking products. Hey, it's about the money. The money, honey. Sometimes people ask, what do we do, Jordan? What do we do? Well, for starters, we need to launch an official media company. And my hope and my goal, and I think Jen and I have great strategy to make it happen, is you cover stories people don't cover, which activates people, and then the people pass the baton, and they go out and they protest, and they demand answers, and they storm politicians' offices, and they flood mayors' offices and governors' offices. That's how you get change. And I've seen it. I've seen it with stuff I did at TYT, that the audience got inspired enough to take action themselves. My activism is the journalism. That's my form of activism.